BookTube! Chelsea, the reading outlaw, here to do yet another Jen Campbell book tag. I cannot get enough of doing this lady's book tags. I just think she comes up with some of the best ideas and some of the most open, conversation-friendly tags. So today I'm doing the time and place book tag, and I have 7 books to show you guys that all remind me specifically of a certain time or place or event or memory. The first one is a kind of very battered trade paperback copy of Gone with the Wind. And the first time I ever read this book, I was on a volunteer trip to the Arizona desert with a group called No Mas Muertos, which would go into the desert and leave food and water along known migrant paths to help kind of prevent migrant death. And death in the wilderness due to dehydration and starvation. We were working with a non-for-profit group, and I read this book every day in the van, and often by booklight late at night in the freezing cold desert. And something about the kind of hot Georgia, Atlanta sun and the work that Scarlett had to go through to rebuild her own family, the two have kind of just always meshed together in my mind, and I just can't see this book without thinking of taking that volunteer trip. Next up is a very slim book called Becoming Abigail, a novella by Chris Abani. I read this book in college for a special honors program I was a part of called the Hall Center Scholars, which brought in different authors and politicians and environmentalists and economists and just a whole bunch of different kind of experts in their field. And we either read their books or watched their presentations, and then we got to have lunch with them and ask them questions. And I got the book signed, and he signed it to... This is one of my favorite author inscriptions I've ever gotten, because he just inscribed it for Chelsea, who is so very beautiful, and then he signed it Chris Abani. And I just thought that that was so very sweet of him. And the book itself is about a young woman who has to deal with being an immigrant in London after being cast aside by her father because she looks exactly like her mother, and her mother has passed away. She deals with sexual abuse and physical abuse, and all of it is just wrapped up in this tiny little novel where every word counts and every sentence counts. And I just have always remembered this fondly as kind of a really good sticking out point in my college experience, and something that I've always looked back on incredibly fondly, and kind of the sea of what happened throughout my 4 years at university. Next up is the first graphic novel I've ever read. You guys have seen and heard me talk about this before. It's Preludes and Nocturnes, which is the first volume in Neil Gaiman's Sandman series. I had never read a graphic novel before talking to my brother, Brandon, who is a big graphic novel fan, especially a big Sandman fan, and he pointed me to these books. This is one that I've bought since then, but the first time I ever got them, I got them from my local library, and it was like a huge omnibus bind-up edition of every Sandman volume. And so I read that, and so I've actually read the entire Sandman series. I read it in a weekend, sitting on my bed, wrapped in a comforter, eating ramen, just absorbed into this series. And I had never seen a story told like that before, or read a book where a story is told like that before. And I just kind of felt this connection to my brother, who lives in South Carolina and who I don't get to see very often. And so this book has always just kind of made me feel especially connected to him, and has always kind of really cemented for me an affinity for Neil Gaiman. Next up is a book you guys are probably surprised to see, just because I feel like, this book, everybody has memories of this book, but for me, this is especially poignant for this copy, because this copy was actually the copy I bought specifically to take on a road trip with me the first time I ever went out of town with my husband, and I actually read him this book out loud. And it was a reread for me, but it was the first time for him. And like I said, it was the first road trip we'd ever taken together, the first vacation we'd ever had. And I read the whole series out loud to him, starting with this one, obviously. And that has just always been a really fond memory for me. And I just think that, it's something we do regularly now. We either listen to audiobooks or I will read something out loud. But this was the first time we'd ever done anything like that. And it was actually the first time I'd ever read aloud to somebody. So it was really special, and I thought kind of romantic moment for me. So I've always really liked The Hunger Games, especially as that, for that, a little extra special place in my heart. Next up is the rest of these are all books you guys have seen before, so they probably shouldn't come as a surprise. Bel Canto, I read one summer going on vacation with my parents down to Mississippi to visit some family friends. I remember so vividly sitting in a rainy van reading this book and getting so mad with the ending that I literally threw it from the back bench seat all the way up to the front and hit the back of my mom's chair with it, and she got kind of pissed. But I was so mad at how this book ended. I just left it sitting on the floor of the van the rest of the drive, and I almost couldn't even look at it. But of course, then I did pick it up and I read it again immediately because it's fantastic. But the ending just pissed me off so badly that I'll never ever forget that moment with this book. Next up is a book that I read shortly after it came out, Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. And I just remember never feeling quite the same way about a female protagonist since I'd read Little Women for the first time and met Jo March. To me, Kath Avery is like right there below that in kind of my female character pantheon of people I relate to. And so reading this for me has just always been a very special moment because seeing so much of myself in my life and the life of my friends reflected in a book has just always stuck with me as something. I don't even know if I could tell you like where I read it or the surroundings or like the eventfulness because it wasn't all that big a deal. It was just a book that I had picked up at the library and I read it. But then it was just so, ever since then, I just can't stop thinking about how good this book is in terms of how well it reflected me and my life and the people that I know. And I recommend it to everyone all the time. I've shown you guys this before, but I absolutely love it. This is the special collector's edition that has the fan art in the front and in the back. I also have this edition of Eleanor and Park as well. I also have copies of Landline, and I need to get a hardback copy of Attachments. But yes, I just absolutely will always carry Fangirl very, very close to my heart. And lastly, because this is a booktube video, and how do you get through a booktube video without talking about Harry Potter, I will forever remember going to my Borders, picking up my copy of the seventh Harry Potter book, going home in a rush, leaving all of my friends behind as they all went to their separate houses, sitting on my couch, getting a giant cup of coffee, and reading the whole thing cover to cover in like 9 hours or whatever, and then sleeping. And just sleeping, and then getting up and reading it again, and then sleeping, and then getting up and reading it again and sleeping. And I will just never feel the way about another book the way that I do about Harry Potter. That's not to say that other books aren't just as good or better, or that my experience with other books hasn't been just as impactful in different ways. But when it comes to a book series that made my reading life so much of what it is, nothing will ever surpass Harry Potter, and nothing wraps up Harry Potter like Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. So that is the end of the time and place book tag. I hope you guys enjoyed seeing me talk about 7 books that are very kind of specifically fond for me. Let me know in the comments down below what books remind you of specific times, places, or memories, because those are some of my favorite bookish stories to hear. As always, like, subscribe, and I will see you guys another day around the internet. All right, bye.